Welcome to the first in a series of forums that will be organized by the CTU Black Caucus. My name is Willie Williamson. I'm a retired CPS teacher, and I am a member of the steering committee of the Black Caucus. Black educators are being attacked under the guise of reform, and both political parties are to be blamed. And this national disgrace has been heaped up on our national public school system. We are seen by the powers that be as part of the low-hanging fruit in the era of budget cuts on social programs and the general dismantling of built-in social safety nets for the working class. Our public school system is in crisis, and the addiction of reform will not solve this problem. Certainly not from the elected officials who don't have a clue when it comes to the process of teaching and learning. We've always thought it a bit strange that people who don't have a clue are making the rules on how our children are taught. That is backwards. So ultimately, our students are being cheated out of a meaningful education, and the teaching force is being systematically dismissed. There should be, pretty much on every corner in every city, a national outcry. This is a disgrace. We, as teachers, have a job to do, and that job will not be easy. The origin of this present crisis began immediately following Brown versus the Board of Education, with the understanding that this is not a new phenomenon. Our fight back must include the fight for real democracy, with the central theme of the fight against racism. Racism has certainly been a central theme of the Trump presidency, and he does not hide it. Education, as we see it, is central to our students playing a productive role in our society. That productive role has been rendered null and void with the reforms that are the so-called reforms that we are actually seeing. But to get back to something that I just said about democracy, if I might use a phrase from Mr. Jack O'Dell, who talked about the beginnings of this country and it having a congenital birth defect when it came to the questions of democracy. When we are not able to include in the curriculum in a meaningful way the true history of how this country was actually started, then we have a problem from the get-go. And we see that there's a huge effort to normalize what we see as rank racism. This is not something that will just vanish and go away. It is embedded in our system, and trying to make it normal is something that we just cannot accept. This has to change. Our attitudes will have to be democracy or nothing at all. This this has to change in a way to where people of all walks of life understand that we have to make it work for everybody. And if it's not working for everybody, it's not going to work at all. That has to be a point driven home to 45 and whoever else takes this place. This is not something that we should see as separate and apart from all of the other struggles that are going on out here. All of this stuff is linked, from environmentalism to school systems, just to name a few. The powers that be sees it. They understand it. And they are determined to tear it down and wreck it and make it seem like it's somebody else's fault. It didn't work. Well, no, it won't ever work if you're not working at making it work. That's the simple truth. If we, as teachers, educators, understand our role simply has to be our students must be able to take part in our society and play productive roles. If they cannot do that, then our system has failed them. But we do understand that teachers want to teach. The so-called reforms that we have going on have not allowed teachers to teach. That is by design. And that is where we have to pick up the struggle and just say to people, this is going to work for all of us, or it is not going to work at all. Thank you. At this time, I would like to introduce the steering committee members that are responsible for most of the work that we're starting to do. And I'd just like for them to stand. Margot, they're on the wall over. Margot, Queen, Pat Bowden, Pat Kanazi, and Michael Bronson. And LaShawn, Alan Kern, Tammy Vinson, and yours truly. Thank you very much. Okay. At this time, I would like to introduce a speaker here that has been very, very instrumental in writing some of the things that our group wants to make public. Our statement on school closing was written by my cohort here, Kim, and at this point in time, we'd like to have her read it.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being guests. Many of you come not just from a school, but you come from other places because you're interested in the demise of the black teacher and the demise of the black student and the demise of black labor and the demise of the black community. And all of those things, as Willie has said, all of them are related. And we feel as unionists that we're able to add another layer to the conversation. But we also feel that as unionists, we have to admit some of the mistakes. We have to go back to some of the considerations. We have to make linkages with different parts of the community, different parts of government, and we have to have some sort of vision or perspective of how this is happening. One of the ways that we get this out is we have monthly meetings. The monthly meetings are every third Tuesday, and they are held at Mount Carmel Missionary Baptist Church, 2976 South Wabash. All are welcome. We also have these fora, and we have usually every 2 months a movie or a documentary that is apropos to some of the things that we're talking about, and with that comes a vigorous discussion. We just did show 70 Acres last week, and we had a very, very good conversation with a couple of people who were part of the production, the director and some other things. So these are things that you should know about your union, but you should also know that we're the AFT Black Caucus. We are a historical wing of the union. As Black people who are in education had to fight to get into CPS and then fight for our rights in CPS to be fully vested and fully paid, we also had to move our union in that way. We weren't fully accepted into our union without a lot of fighting, and yet, having been part of that union, that is how we became part of the middle class, how we were able to build up our capacity to live in neighborhoods like South Shore and Chatham and the West Side, and historically Black neighborhoods that had turned from other cultures into Black neighborhoods. So we realized that our livelihoods are at stake, and we are the fightest hardest, and we've been the first to be slaughtered in this education deform, reform movement that poses itself as a civil rights movement and is not. But because our people are so hungry and desperate in such situations, oftentimes the media and the other people in the ruling class, those people who feel that they can look after and shepherd our best interests, including some of the people that we've supported in government, some of the people on both sides that have been complicit, and really there are more sides than both, but we'll deal with those two parties. Those people have been complicit in some of our destruction, and we have to be honest about it and hold their feet to the fire. So we decided that when we revived the Black Caucus in 2011, 2012, that we would take a more traditional, radical, and forward-looking kind of approach. And that has been difficult because as the CPS has cut our numbers, as they've fired our people, as they've laid off our PSRPs, as they've put constraints on the amount of parents and the qualifications of them coming into a building, as they have closed the schools in the neighborhoods, as they've killed off some of the economic base, because when we lost our jobs as educators, teachers, and paraprofessionals and clinicians, and the Black veteran teachers and the people who had the historic memory of how to fight, there went the barber. There went the confectioner, the person that sold the candy to us. There went some of the other jobs that were inside the neighborhoods, and there went the neighborhoods. And they know exactly, the ruling class and the people that run this country know exactly what they're doing because they've been doing it to us for a long time. So if you are a union member, every month you get this magazine. When I say a union member, I don't know if the retirees get it unless they ask for it, but really there are some copies here and you're able to get it. This is the Chicago Union Teacher. We call it the Chicago Union Teacher. It's the magazine that gets us some of the information because we are just so inundated and swamped with information. This has information about how we make our own profession better. It's got professional development. It's got information about some of our community partners that we work with. And it talks about some of the issues and the campaigns that we're doing, as well as the research. So those of you who are not in the union, but you're interested in things from our perspective, this is one of the, what I call propaganda pieces that we use. And when I say propaganda, I mean this in the best sense. I don't mean it as advertisement. I don't mean it as, I mean it in a very old organizing sense, which is to organize. You don't just shove this somewhere. You use it to talk about some of the issues of the day and to bring union members, union brothers and sisters closer together, so that's what we do. So I was very surprised and pleased because on the cover of February's cut is this leader here, and it says, Chicago chapter of the American Federation of Teachers, Black Caucus categorically condemns closings proposed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Page 5. So you turn to page 5, and we do have some extra copies in the back. And it's got the statement that we posted on Facebook about 2 months ago. Although one person might write, or two people might write something, we put out statements, but these statements give us a vision of what we're intending to do and then what we do. So I'm going to read it to you and hope that this will spur some of you into action, but since we're so stretched from the ends of the city, some of you might not have even realized that there was a Black Caucus. And that if you're not involved in the Black Caucus, that if these politics or these ideas appeal to you, that you'll get some of your friends involved. If you teach Black students, that you'll become involved. And that we slowly start building up that capacity to say things that maybe in a large scale in a union don't get said right away. And that we can push our union for other kinds of policies as well. One of the saddest facts about Chicago public education is the imposed destruction of the district's schools from within. From the days of segregation to the days of money without condition in the post-civil rights era, those who ran Chicago public schools have messed over students and constricted the profession, so the workers paid for the mistakes of the bosses. From the 1990s through the early 2000s, the district further constricted Chicago public education by turning to the college preparatory model at the expense of vocational school, reconstituting, turning around, and closing schools, and pitting schools against each other while supporting a charter school movement funded with the monies from damaged schools. The district collaborated with the General Assembly during these times to get away with these morally bankrupt choices. While the Chicago Teachers Union protested against the decisions and negotiated with the district, the school closings of 2013 continued to hurt educators, Black educators in particular, by removing them from employment and creating conditions whereby they could never achieve substantive employment and education again. These rules also kept the number of educators of colors at bay, a condition the union has tried to remedy contractually with the Grow Your Own program. The Chicago chapter of the American Federation of Teachers Black Caucus has kept tabs on how these changes have affected Black students, Black teachers, and the economy in their neighborhoods, as well as how they have damaged the profession and affected how we do our jobs. As a result, we categorically condemn the school closings proposed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel in December. As in other sectors of the economy, from the inception of this nation, history bears out that Black people have been used and targeted to increase the profits of those decision makers who hold all the power in society. We support members of the community who are fighting back against these and all attacks, and suggest that all testing contracts, requests for a proposal for charters, and vending contracts be suspended and considered for termination if applicable. They have not served the students of Chicago well, and only the efforts of the remaining educators have improved or held fast the educational experience for our students. We also insist that those fired teachers who were put out of a job through the unscrupulous plans of the heads of Chicago and the CEOs who worked underneath them, should at least have their credentials reinstated and their benefits available. Lastly, we posit that only a school system where professional power lies with the people who have direct contact with the children is the hope of the future and a bulwark against the monetary waste and flighty trends that waste everyone's time and effort. No slick substitutions, no more opening of charter schools, no more public school closings. Signed, the Chicago chapter of the AFT Black Caucus. We hope that this statement will rouse you to come up with some of your own questions. We are still expecting our speaker to arrive. Oh, our speaker is here. And I'm going to turn this back over, but this put something on your mind, come up with some questions so we can have a hearty debate, and then figure out steps that we're going to move forward. Thank you on behalf of all of us on steering.
Thank you, Kim. At this time, we're going to have a presentation put together by the research department here on the decline of black educators. Our presenter will be Pavlin Jankov.
Thank you for having me. Thanks to the Chicago chapter of the AFT Black Caucus. I wanted to present a historical overview of segregation and inequity in the Chicago public schools, because I think looking at it over time and across a lot of policy issues, you'll see the impact of the decisions by the district that have led to the mass displacement of black educators in Chicago. The slide that you see right there, that's an image on the top. You see that's an image of the new Jones College Prep High School, the selective enrollment high school in the Loop. Of course, one of the communities that has had one of the largest increases in population, high-income earners in Chicago. Below it, you'll see the divestment of the school district. That's the closed Parkman School in the, I believe, in the Fuller Park neighborhood in Greater Bronzeville. That was closed in 2013. So you can see right there the massive disparity in where the funds go in CPS. Next slide, please. There are two quotes that I thought I'd pull for you from the leaders of the Chicago Public Schools. And actually, I should adjust this because currently the former chief education officer is now our current CEO. But in response to a story that WBEZ broke about the massive spending on new school construction across CPS, hundreds of millions of dollars going towards what they called overcrowded schools, WBEZ found that actually a lot of the communities that got money weren't fully overcrowded. Some of them were even efficient by CPS standards, yet these were communities with predominantly white majority communities. And in response to this, then chief education officer said, that's part of the history of Chicago. I don't think that's a CPS issue, which is a continuation of a lot of what we've heard from CPS, which is to say, you know, the segregation, the inequities we see in Chicago are just natural outcomes of the way the population works in the city. We don't have anything to do with that, right? So when Barbara Byrd Bennett was closing 50 schools, they denied the charge of racism, said, you know, where were these parents 10 years ago when the schools were failing? Once again, trying to cast off the blame, even though their own policies contributed to what we see. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to start with the main impact that we've seen, and we really wanted to draw focus on, is the mass displacement of black educators in CPS. Since 2001, there has been a 53% decline in the number of black educators. Over 5,000 black educators in CPS are gone. And yes, there are fewer teachers in the system overall, but you'll notice that the overall number of teachers has only declined by 16% in the orange chart compared to the massive decline in black educators. Next slide, please. So going back even further, back in 1989, about half the district educators were black educators. This was a time when the district was still under the consent decree, which was required that they be entered when they were sued by the U.S. Federal Civil Rights Division over the massive and sustained segregation in their schools. And we can see that this was a time when there were actually black educators across the whole school district, about 49%. And every decade since, we've seen a consistent decline. In 2001, it dropped to 40%. From 2001 to 2012, we saw the huge decline from 40% to 26% across the district, and that drop continues. Meanwhile, as you can see, the percentage of white teachers is now the majority in CPS. Similarly, the percentage of black students has also declined in CPS, and that's related, we know, to all the kinds of policies that CPS has had about school closures, as well as the overall divestment across the neighborhoods across Chicago. Students went from 60% African American in 1989, and now they're about 38% of the district. Oh, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. So yeah, that's the chart on black student decline in CPS. Next slide. And I wanted to contrast this with the way schools themselves have changed across CPS. We've seen a huge investment in selective enrollment schools over this time period. And I want to draw special attention to the time since 2001. As you know, that's when Renaissance 2010 was the huge project of the school district, where they opened new schools, closed down predominantly black and brown schools across the south and west sides, and put a lot of money into schools of choice, which is what they called it. And we've seen that the percentage of black students in those schools has declined in every single year overall as a trend since 2000. And along with that, we've seen that the percentage of white students, of course, across these selective enrollment schools has increased. In around 2007, the school district stopped their policy of ensuring that there was diversity across their selective enrollment schools, the policy that was required of them under the consent decree. And they stopped that diversity program, and what we've seen is since then a continued sustained decline in the number of black and brown students in these kinds of schools that get a lot of district investment. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the other policies that were alongside this massive expansion of selective enrollment in schools of choice. What we also had at this time were school turnarounds. School turnarounds were a policy where the school district would lay off every single employee in the school, claiming that those employees were the reason why those schools were failing, even though those schools were suffering from disinvestment, lack of resources over years. And so there have been over 30 that have taken place since 2008. It was a policy that targeted these low-performing schools according to standardized test scores, which we know have a lot of problems with them. And they replaced the school management and local oversight with private operators and district management. Staff at those schools were predominantly African American. Those staff were displaced. In 2013 and 2014, the most recent years where we had school turnarounds, more than 60% of the educators in those schools were African American. Those teachers were laid off. Teachers were replaced by staff that were overwhelmingly new, and the diversity of teaching experience was lost in many cases. For example, in 10 turnaround schools of 2012, first-year teachers represented 60% of teaching staff after the turnaround. Teachers with 10 years or more of experience shrank from nearly 70% of staff before turnaround to just 17%. So what we see is it's not just an assault on black educators, it's an assault on experienced black educators, and those are the teachers that have been gutted from the school system through these kinds of policies. These kinds of policies, the Chicago Teachers Union has been fighting in court over. We have a class action lawsuit against the turnarounds, which we believe have systematically discriminated against African American teachers. Next slide, please. So I wanted to graphically represent some of the segregation in these schools, and this is it's a scatter plot, so it's not like an infographic, but I think helping you look at some of these points will really show the segregation in our schools. So each dot on this chart represents a school. And the graph shows the percent of black teachers in those schools and the percent of black students. Black teachers is represented from top to bottom, and the percentage of black students is represented from left to right. And so you'll notice that most of the dots, all these dots represent CPS schools. Most of the dots are actually concentrated along two sides of this chart, in the top right corner and then the top left corner. So that represents schools where the staff and the students are either predominantly black or predominantly not black. In addition to that, I've also shown the schools that were closed during this period from 2001 to 2012. Those circles are highlighted in black. And you'll notice that predominantly those schools are way over on the right side of this chart. These are all the schools that were 99, 98%, 100% African-American students with a majority of black teaching staff, which is why they're on the top right portion of this graph. And so that shows you the disproportionate impact of these kinds of policies. Over 70% of schools with both a black majority teaching staff as well as over a 90% black student population were actually affected by school actions in this time period. 70% of those schools. Next slide, please. So what's another policy that CPS was engaged in this time, right? We have charter schools that were opening across this time period. These charter schools were opening predominantly in African-American and Latino communities, and these schools were opening alongside schools that were closed. So the white dots, hopefully you can see it with enough contrast. The white dots represent the schools, charter schools, and the black triangles represent where the school actions across this time period were. And you'll notice that they're concentrated on the west sides and along the south sides. The blue colors represent the concentration of the African-American population. So you'll see that these are communities predominantly African-American that face both an influx of charter schools, private operators, as well as a decrease in their own access to neighborhood public schools. Next slide, please. So returning to this chart, this is just the 2013 school closings. And one of the things that I want to highlight before I get to the schools that were closed is once again, each dot represents a school in CPS. And this chart overall looks a lot like the first chart I showed you with those dots, right? But there are a couple things that have changed. And it might be a little bit difficult to go back and forth, but one of the things that's changed is the number of dots that kind of landed right along the middle, or away from the corners. Those dots have actually decreased, and more dots are now towards the right axis as well as to the bottom left corner of this chart. Once again, that's where we represent the schools that are hyper-segregated, schools that either are virtually all black with black teaching staff, or schools that have no black teaching staff and no black students. So our schools have actually gotten more segregated in this time, especially, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, especially schools that have no black teachers and no black students. That has actually increased a lot, even in just 10 years. And of course, the school closings that happened in 2013, the historic closure of 50 schools that I don't believe has happened anywhere else in the nation all at once. Those schools, again, are highlighted in black, those black dots. And you notice, once again, all those dots are virtually all along the right axis. All those are schools with predominantly black students with predominantly black teaching staff. Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight what I had brought up, that we've seen a huge growth in the number of schools that had virtually no black teachers and no black students. And going back to 2001, there were about 56 schools where both the demographics of teachers and students was less than 10% black. That has tripled by 2012 to 145, which represents 25% of all district schools. So you'll see that something that was I wouldn't say a full outlier, but around 1 in 10 schools were schools that had very few black teachers and black students. Now it's 1 out of 4. And you can see along, I've also added the percent of schools with less than 5% black teachers and less than 5% black students. That has gone from 16 schools, a couple schools scattered across the entire school district to now 79. Well, this is 2012, right? So a couple years ago. So we've seen this huge increase in segregation. Next slide, please. And so this graph also addresses that issue, but I go back a little bit further in time because this was actually a finding that I was a bit surprised by, was the extent to which we had black educators across every type of school in CPS in 1989. So what this graph represents is the number of students, non-black students, attending schools where the school was at least a third black teachers, which in CPS right now, the percentage of black teachers overall is around 23%, right? So even compared to now, a school with 33% of black teachers is actually pretty high relative to the average, right? But back then we had over 50,000 non-black students attending these kinds of schools where there were over a third or around a third of their teachers were black educators. That represented 32% of all non-black students in the school district. But like you can see on the chart, that number has plummeted in each decade and now sits at roughly just 7,000 or 3% of all non-black students having access to a school where there's a significant number of black educators in the classroom. Next slide, please. This also addresses the issue, but from the opposite angle. This looks at the number of, again, I want to draw attention to the number of non-black students attending schools with no black teachers. Went from just a couple hundred in 1989. So you know that in 1989, we were under this consent decree that required the school district to track segregation and to some extent remedy the segregation of their staff as well as their students. And so in that situation, we actually had not just black students with access to black teachers, but all students. And so it's very, very rare for students to not have a black educator in the classroom. But that number has ballooned and gone from just a couple hundred to now nearly 30,000 non-black students where there are no black teachers in their school, no. And that represents nearly 14% of all non-black students in the school system. And the reason I wanted to address this was because we talk about segregation in the schools, and we know that there's been a huge decline in the number of black teachers in our schools, in our black schools, and we know that charters, turnarounds, school actions have caused a lot of that, but we forget is that this district actually had opportunities for black educators to be across the entire school district and find jobs, whether it be on the south or the north side. And that was an issue of policy. That wasn't an issue of natural demographics. That was CPS having a policy. Next slide, please. And I wanted to focus a little bit on this because I wanted to talk about what some of the impacts of this kind of segregation have inside the classroom, inside the schools. I know one of the big issues that has been looked at over the last couple of years has been exclusionary discipline. And the school district, under pressure, has responded to some of this. But what we see is really the continued reliance on exclusionary discipline. And this is a national trend, but I think it's very severe in Chicago, is how exclusionary discipline, just like the other policies, just like the other corporate reform policies that have negatively impacted students of color, disproportionately affects black students. So here on this chart, what I show you is the rate of exclusionary discipline use in schools, what we call intensely segregated black schools, where students are over 90% black. The rate of unique students receiving in-school suspensions or out-of-school suspensions is represented on the left side of this chart. Those are the schools where the population is at least 90% black. And less than 10% black, you can see the rates of those discipline on the right side. So you see up to a 4 times difference in the use of these kinds of policies depending on what kind of school you're in. And so, this goes to something that is a civil rights issue, right? So some of these national groups have looked at this. We know the U.S. Department of Civil Rights was looking at this. And CPS, consistently over the years has shown this kind of disproportionate impact. Even as the rate of exclusionary discipline usage has dropped, we still see a disparity by students, by student race. Next slide, please. So, where does that leave us? We know that segregation is not something that is without the role of the school district. The school district has played a role in segregation. They've played a role in maintaining it and furthering it, and it continues. This is a map of all the neighborhood high schools across the school district, and CPS's proposal to close all 4 neighborhood high schools in Englewood, as you can see on this map, will leave a gaping hole in Englewood for guaranteed access to a public neighborhood school. The district is proposing to create a new school in its place, but that school will not be a full open access neighborhood school, which is not surprising in terms of looking at CPS policy. This was something that I believe Generation All pulled. They looked at all school openings since 1995, and they found that 88% of instances where a new school was created in lieu of school closures, that new school had some kind of barrier to enrollment. So the school district isn't creating equal opportunity. They're actually further segregating our schools and using policy. It's not something that is inherent or something that's happening with demographics. The school system is an active participant in this kind of stuff. So I guess what I hope to leave you with is to really use some of the terminology around segregation when we talk about current CPS policy. We shouldn't shirk from calling it active segregationist policy. Going back to the issue of what was found about the investment in schools that were overcrowded, the Willis wagons in the 60s were a method of keeping black families in black neighborhoods and not investing in new facilities for them, but creating these small, tiny little trailers for their students to remain in those neighborhoods. The inverse right now is that they're creating new schools, selective enrollment schools for the populations that they deem worthy of getting that, and they're also creating and investing in build outs, annexes, and things like that. We have to pay attention to that and call it for what it is. Thank you. And I believe I'm open to questions now or later in the program, whatever. Later?
It'd be later.
Later, okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavlin. Okay, I met this brother in 2010. I was the teacher at Bradwell School in the South Shore area. And there was a couple of things that he said to me that got me to understand and know that we need to really allow him to help out in any way that he possibly could. One of the first things he said was, "I'm not a politician," and didn't like the word and didn't want to be described as someone who we just put that tag on. And he said that he was there to help, and that was enough for me. Brothers and sisters, Mr. Jonathan Jackson, who is a part of the Operation Push Saturday morning programs, and of course he runs that program now, I do believe, and he is here to speak with us, and we will have a Q&A situation with Brother Jackson with Ms. Tammy Benson, who has also joined us on stage. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. So let me tell you just one rule. The more I hear from you, the less I'll talk. The less I hear from you, the longer I will talk. Good evening. Okay, that's what I'm excited about. I see a friend and brother, a mentor of mine, Brother Bob Starks. Please stand, sir, or wave your hand. And the gentleman's name that just was so kind?
Willie Williamson.
Mr. Willie Williamson. Give him a round of applause. Thank you, Brother Willie. I was listening to the statistics that the previous speaker, congratulations on, give me your name, sir? Pavlin. Give him a round of applause as well, sir. When I saw those numbers, it's like, what's new? What's new? We can close our eyes and go in a time capsule, and we have seen this slow train wreck happening. I want to thank Ms. Vinson for inviting me and giving me this opportunity and coming by Rainbow Push. I'd like to thank my friend and neighbor, Ms. Pat Kanazi. In case no one else can reach me, Ms. Pat Kanazi will find you and walk you down, and will make sure you're there on time. Give my neighbor Pat a round of applause. And I want to talk about Black History Month and our need for forward progress on education. And so, having been given this opportunity to speak, I went to my bookshelf to look up some conditions that would be interesting. This is the Negro Handbook, published by Ebony Magazine in 1966. And I said, let me see if there's anything different between then and now, Brother Starks. Brother Starks always made us go get some research. Let me read these first two paragraphs for you, if you will. The connection, and it's in the chapter on illiteracy, dropout, and unemployment. The connection between poverty, poor education, and unemployment has provided for the Negro most of the links in an unbreakable chain of deprivation, frustration, and despair, and that each of these provides a handicap which, by its very nature, almost precludes the avoidance of the others. Educational deficiencies handicap the worker in obtaining employment, lack of employment, with the resultant poverty and relief status, often robs the worker of ambition, motivation, and the recognition of the values which education provides both economically and culturally. I would tell you that our lack of education targeting the African American community in Chicago has been focused, consistent, and very deliberate. I think that elected officials, from the mayor's office all the way to our local aldermanic offices, should be held accountable. Why do people move out of the city of Chicago? Is the inverse of why do people come to a city. People come to a city where there is opportunity, and most importantly, where there's safety. Why are people leaving the city of Chicago in the 22 African American and Hispanic neighborhoods out of the 77 neighborhoods? Because of lack of safety and lack of opportunity. When you have 1 in 6 murders that are solved, that means it's better than an 82% chance that you can get away with killing someone. There's an 80+% chance that you can get away with killing someone in the city of Chicago, and more specifically in the African American and the Hispanic community. This should give us rise and give us alarm for all of our safety. In North America now, New York City is the largest city, California and Los Angeles is the second, and now we're saying that Houston is going to surpass the population of Chicago, and we're going to be the 4th largest city in America. Illinois is now the 6th largest state. Pennsylvania is now larger than the state of Illinois. We have a larger issue. The attack on the African American community is an attack on the soul and heart of the city of Chicago. Chicago cannot be great without the African American community. As we think about African American History Month, We have so much to be proud of and cherish. African American History Month was founded right here in the city of Chicago. We don't know that now. And what was the purpose of African American History Month? Dr. Carter G. Woodson was born in 1875. He had to work in West Virginia and could not go to high school until the age of 20, where he finished it in 2 years. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, that lived right here in the city of Chicago, is the second African American to ever finish Harvard University. First was Dr. W.B. Du Bois. And what did he find out at Harvard University that made him focus on Negro History Week and then African American History Month as we talk about it now, and why did he dedicate this month of February to African American History Month, and what did he say about it? The last point first. First, he envisioned a time where there would not be a need for African American History Month. He wanted to make it clear to put on the pages of the books where African Americans had been deleted, denied, and never had shared their story. When he got to Harvard, he could not see African Americans' contributions. He says, if you're a culture that has not made any contribution, you will be scorned and mocked. We have to put our impression on the books, not for propaganda, but there was something more than the white on the page. There was the black on the page to make American history whole. Why did Dr. Carter G. Woodson have African American History Month in the month of February? Some people will tell you because it's the shortest month. No, that's not the reason why. He put in African American History Month in the month of February because this is the birthday month of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. He wanted to see black and white making progress together. So when people would ask you, does Clarence Thomas belong in African American History Month, or who belongs on the board? People that have made progress, not the first this and the first that, people that have tried to unite and uplift and make forward contribution to the American dream. What is our challenge here today as the CTU? One day, Mr. Brunson, you got to let me figure out how I can become a member of CTU. Find a category for those of us that are not on the CPS payroll, that care about our tax dollars, that care about the children in our school, so that we can join and be a part. Because I heard all these facts. I'm tired of hearing the facts because nothing's changed in my lifetime. And I knew when they closed down Bradwell Elementary School in South Shore that although my children weren't there, why was I over there? Because I wanted to stop the bullets from flying. Because when you close that school and that child gets forced to go to another school, you disrupt their life, you bring in teachers that have no vested interest in the community, you gut the payroll, you traumatize those children. Now that child's an angry child. And the teacher that was holding the last part of the society and the community together is now gone. That's an angry child. And the bullets start flying after they get beat up at another school. I was teaching at Kennedy King College. And so I was asking my students, what's in the news? What's going on? And they just started another one of these programs. Is that Brother G2? Oh my goodness. Another program is started for safety, and they said they were going to hire some parents to do safety and security, which is something I don't understand. Don't we have a Chicago Police Department? Can't they provide safety for people on the transit system, in the school, and in our neighborhood? Moving right along. I'm at Kennedy King College, and I said, something tragic had happened. I think it was at Bogan High School, not very far from us, that a child had gotten killed on like the first day of school. And then the next day, the school was naturally, mourning and grieving. And a young lady pointed out the young man that killed the child the day before. The child that killed someone the day before came to school the next day, Ms. Vincent. And I said, oh my God. The young lady was so traumatized, she couldn't hold it in. She had to tell on what she saw. So I asked my students, what could have been done different? And then one of the students raised their hand and they told me, they said, Mr. Jackson, that boy that killed the other child, he shot my cousin. Now I'm infuriated. I'm like, why didn't you say something about it? You could have possibly have stopped this murder. They said, well, my cousin didn't want to talk to the police. I said, why not? He says, because he wanted to kill him himself. He wasn't going to snitch. Why do I share that story with you? We know where the violence is coming from. It's not the children, the society is violent. And when you close these schools and you don't solve the crime and the officers get away, you can't expect the children to come up. That child that wanted to kill, there is revenge killing going on these streets. People jumping out, shooting. Why do we have to be concerned about Bradwell Elementary? 7 years ago now, and the neighborhood is on fire in South Shore. And the mayor is acting like he doesn't know anything about it. I'm not running against the mayor, don't get me wrong. But I don't want anything from that man. I want to speak truth to power. And I want some more people to stand up and just tell the truth. City of Chicago is a big bribery machine where everybody wants something. Some people just want to have a safe environment, a great school system, and live a happy life. That's what brings me out to be a part of the Chicago Teachers Union. I've been teaching at Chicago State for the last 7 years, and I'm going to sit down on this note. And I went to North Carolina A&T State University, graduated in 3.5 years with honors, went to Whitney Young High School, went to Northwestern University to get an MBA. And to see that a Mr. Paul Vallis can become a chief administrative officer at Chicago State, and they denied me from teaching one business class at Chicago State. And when you talk about African-American teachers and how we're not in the ranks anymore, I couldn't get at Chicago State. My class was oversubscribed of young students that wanted to learn business, and I've done plenty of it. And I couldn't teach in my own community at one of the state universities. A man that doesn't have a master's can make a rule that people that have a master's must have in order to teach, and then I can't teach, and he gets to work there. I don't hear you, so you're making me very upset. Black History Month. Black and white making progress together. African American teachers have been targeted. Those that have been in the system over 15 years have been scientifically and clinically removed. We can change that. We can fight that. Charter schools, turnaround school, every derivation, every function of every game of a school besides a highly functioning public school is simply wrong. I want Paul Vallis to take his education and do that same thing in a white school district and not at every black school. And guess what? It's not going to happen because they don't need them. And I'm telling you, playing with our children's education is wrong. The point I want to leave you in closing, African American History Month is about progress. From 1619 to 1865, 246 years where you could not have an education, denied, could not have a name as a person. People like John Brown, people like Charles Sumner, people that fought to help us, made progress. They too should be on the walls of African American History Month. Poverty is something we can combat and challenge in our lifetime. We don't have to close these schools. Show me one neighborhood where a school is closed where the property values have rebounded. When you gut a school, you gut a community. You can fix a house, you can relocate a building, you can do another business, but you can't relocate a school. When I drive past Dunbar earlier today and I parked my car and took a look at it, and to know that there are 3 schools within one school building, And Dunbar doesn't even field basketball teams and football teams. When I think of the West Side and I think of hope, as I was driving over here, I was thinking, Brother G2, of Darrell Stingley. When Brother Darrell Stingley finally made it off the West Side, he was a light and a beacon that proved that black athletes could rise up even from the West Side of Chicago. And after he made it to the NFL, follow me, Terry Cummings went to the NBA. Isaiah Thomas went to the NBA. Doc Rivers came out of Maywood and went to the NBA. There was hope. We believed that we could do something in the city of Chicago. When Katrina Adams goes to Whitney Young and is now the president of the National Tennis Association, we believe we can do something. When Shawnee Johnson has to move off of the South Side because there was no skating rink to move to Evanston, and he went to the Olympics to win silver, we believe that we can skate. When the young lady just won the US Open with the coach Kamar, we know we can play tennis. Let's put the facilities back into the neighborhood. We do not have problem children. We have children with problems, and we can fix it.
All righty, thank you. So when we did the planning of this day, we were thinking that we would have a Q&A session after Jonathan Jackson made the statement, that we would ask a few questions. So we have a few of our own, so we're going to take a little while to ask him to respond to those, and then we'll take a couple from the audience. So one of the things that I thought was kind of prevalent in the PowerPoint, and based on some of the things that you said, is that gentrification and the outward migration of people in the city and the state, that's an issue. One of the things that have been used to close schools has been the standardized testing under No Child Left Behind and some other things. So our thought is, what is the rubric and who designs the rubric that's causing the destruction of our schools now at this present state? So you're a product of Chicago Public Schools?
Well, let me tell you about my story. I grew up in South Shore. I went to John J. Pershing Elementary School on 31st and Rhodes. We went out of district because our school, in many ways, was inadequate that's closest to my house. So we're one of the rule breakers in order to get an education. And thank God we didn't have money for private school and other things. People make the best decisions and will sacrifice for their children. So we need to make sure the schools are adequate, and these artificial boundaries on where the schools are exclusive. This is, the selective enrollment school. Now, look at what's wrong with CPS. One point. Are we on the 5th or the 6th CPS CEO in the last 5 or 6 years?
I think it's at least a 6. Yeah. It's at least 6.
The last 3 resigned in disgrace.
Right,
And you think we don't need an elected school board?
right. Yeah.
I mean, that's vulgar. And for this to be the only district in the entire state that doesn't have an elected school board, it's too much concentration of power, and we should do the mayor a favor. He should put his hands around the police department where they're selling drugs and robbing people. He should put his hands around the police department with Eddie Johnson where they can't solve crime. He should put his hands around, and we should help him get his hands out of the Chicago public school system. That's one. What's wrong? You cannot have a successful system with this much turnover. That's planned chaos. And the mayor has appointed all these persons. We need to stop the chaos. Business thrives where there's planning. We should know what schools are underutilized today for 5 years from now in Inglewood. You should build the school before you close the school. That's what they did under Daley administration. They tore down the public housing, and then they said they were going to rebuild it. Then they stacked $500 million in cash and never built it again. It's a cruel game. So I hope I answered your question. You cannot have a fully functioning school system where the leadership turns over of a 30,000 plus employee system, $6 billion budget, where the CEO on average is not staying there for more than a year. I think that is a leadership crisis.
Right, I don't disagree. So one of the things too is just the funding of education. So there's money that comes in to fund education from the city, the state, from the federal government. So the allocation of this money has been most of the reasons why the people are leaving in disgrace. Barbara Bird with her scam and Claypool with his latest scam. I guess I'm saying this in a roundabout way. What do you think we need to focus on, other than the fact that we need an elected school board to actually look at the finances? What would make our school system work better with the money that's coming in and where we are, I guess, with the students that are currently still in the city?
Okay, I think that's an excellent question. I think there are many ways to solve the school funding issue for CPS. We have 200,000 empty seats in CPS schools. Some of these buildings are 100 years old, and of course they are inadequate. But what's the third rail? What's the real issue that's driving this divisive, hyper segregation? It's race.
Yeah.
And to see that schools are cherry-picked and awarded on Peyton being expanded for $17 million, to see you close 50 schools saying you had to save $43 million, and at the same time you put $19 million back into Safe Passage / the new Underground Railroad. I mean, it's race. To see the schools in Bronzeville that they were closing, and Brother G too, I say it with all sincerity, a man that I look up to, that's willing to sacrifice his body, his mind, his family to make a stand for the school diet elementary, where our children will have access to a local school. Now, what's the challenge there? You're talking about something that's absolutely asinine and idiotic, and I've chosen my words well and very precise. I could have used glutamus maximus or something else, but I wanted to connect. It is insanity to test a child before they get into a school. It's insanity to test a child before they get into a school. Our children need to go to school, then you give them a test. But we should stop turning away children talking about they didn't pass a test. Did you educate them first? That's fundamentally wrong, and we need to stop buying into something that they say first that absolutely makes no sense. Repeat it to yourself and do it in quiet, have a cup of milk, or then have a drink and say it, and then you'll realize, you're gonna test my child before they can go to school? Yeah. My child didn't pass the test before they got into the school. I'm gonna leave it right there.
So yeah, that
ought to make you laugh.
Yeah, it should, but there are a lot of false narratives, and one of the things, and I guess I have a two-pronged thing, and I guess we'll attack one, because one is the overuse of tests to even make those sort of decisions with the ranking of a school, the teacher's ability to keep their job, the child's ability to get promoted. That's a shame. Testing.
Okay,
But another
they
thing.
want you to bring
Oh,
them
I'm
up.
sorry. I was just saying that the whole testing regime creates a whole lot of issues, not only with the students' ability to get admitted into a selective enrollment, whether or not they get promoted, whether or not a school's ranking allows it to remain open or not. But so if you could speak to first to that testing regime, but also just the narrative that's
Just on the
attached to
first
all of
question,
that.
the first part of the testing is a
Yeah,
fraud.
I agree.
Okay, Barbara Bird Bennett proved that, that her and the people that put that system together, that was fraudulent. Hello? Yeah. Okay, the people that were creating the test weren't qualified to give a test.
Yeah.
And I still don't know what a CEO of a public school is.
Yeah.
Why don't we have a superintendent where we have to be state certified like every other place?
Education.
I finished Whitney Young in 1984. I come out of the era of Dr. Manfred Bird, Dr. Ruth Love, where we had superintendents that were state certified and qualified. Why don't we have state certified, qualified persons? Since then, we've had Paul Vallis, a budget analyst, cutter, something, not a CPA, not an MBA, just the budget. Ron Huberman, a policeman, to go over our children. Barbara Bird Bennett, whatever she did, bless her heart. And I don't know how you fire the CEO without firing the CFO that presents it to the CEO that gives it to the board. The CEO doesn't vote on it. The CFO gives the material and they leave that person in place. So it's a fraudulent system. And when you create the test, it's not to include our children and find out the best that's in them, it's to exclude them. It's like almost the intelligent quotient, the IQ test. It wasn't to help the children, it was to determine who not to give education to. And the city of Chicago has made that an art form.
Yeah, and so I guess my second part was just the whole narrative, because that narrative seems to be that that there's something wrong with black educators. By extension, there's something wrong with black children. So why do we spend the time and money to educate them? Because I think it was when Rahm Emanuel first came to the city, you know, I don't know if it was supposed to be a private conversation that he had with our president, Karen Lewis, that he said 25% of the black kids were going to fail anyway, so why waste money on them? And I think by extension, they're trying to also dismantle black education.
I agree with you, Tammy. And I think part of education is reaching out to the lost, the least, and those that are left behind. At John J. Pershing Elementary School, I had a speech pathologist. I stuttered. So for 6 years, I had to go during the break and I'd get pulled out of class to do my consonants and vowels and Q, R, ch. I didn't get it right. I needed help. There was a speech pathologist. I remember Miss Zubrick and others that came down to teach me, only to have left Chicago for 10 years to go to work outside of the city. And when I came back to Chicago, the very same school that I went to had been turned into a magnet school and then closed, and Aramark is in the parking lot of the school building. And then the schools closest to my house, where I tried to get my children enrolled, did not have a speech pathologist. The same buildings where I could get help, 30 years later, no longer offer the same resources. I remember, and I'll share a story with you, when I was teaching at Kennedy King College. And I thank Dr. Watson for opening my eyes to bring me into assuming some responsibility as an African-American male and finding a classroom to teach in. And 15% of my grade was on class participation. And there was a student, he sat up front in my business math class, and I couldn't get him to talk, and he tested well, but still 15% of the class was class participation. I didn't know in my first days of teaching that if they give you a class at 4 p.m. on Friday in the springtime, that the students don't come when it's 75, 80 degrees outside. So this one child did come, and I walked in there like I couldn't believe it. I was so happy, like somebody did come. And so I said to him, I got you. You can't get away from me now. Your class participation has been low, and now you can make it up today, and I want to work with you. And so I asked him to tell me something about him, and the child started to stutter and couldn't even say his name. I was overwhelmed with emotion, and I had to step outside, and I cried in the hallway because that child reminded me of myself. And somehow in these neighborhoods, that child was not given the resources of having a speech pathologist or someone to help him. And that's when fighting against these school closings really sunk in my heart to be a part of an advocacy. But for the grace of God, that would be me, and I couldn't be up here today with you.
Thank you. All right, so, thank you. So Anyway, if anyone has questions in the audience, I think if you could stand and speak so we can all hear you, that would be perfect. I think I can give her this one.
You can have this one.
Answer. So you can. You want to carry it around?
Do you want to come up and, who's going to speak up?
Sorry about the tears. It doesn't take long for me to
okay.
get very upset about
It's
this.
okay.
It's destroying human potential.
Jonathan, we know what the problems are. So what do you suggest, particularly for the Black community, that we start doing?
First of all, we should have an audit of facilities, number one. What would that do? That would tell you for future planning purposes which buildings have lead, which buildings do not have air conditioning, which buildings have lead, which buildings like Mollison are full of rats and things that should be taken care of. Number two, with the inventory of 200,000 seats, it's overcapacity. The city was built, our current infrastructure was built with 3.6 million residents, and now we're looking 50 years later at 2.6 million residents. You need to relook at the distribution of those resources. Number three, our area of segregation has to be confronted head on. I worked with parents from Abraham Lincoln Elementary School in Lincoln Park. The CPS had just put a $3 million green kitchen in there and everything. And at the same time that they were closing down 50 elementary schools on the south side, CPS had given a school that did not have overcrowding $20 million. They forced it on them in Lincoln Park. And what did it do? It took their ground level playground away from the children, expanded the building, and put their playground on the top of the building, and tore down a brand new $3 million greenhouse, kitchen, and other things at the school. Lincoln Park Elementary School is surrounded by, at the time, 5 or 6 level 1 schools that had capacity. There was excess capacity all around them. They did not need to expand. And they were not even on the top 50 in schools that needed the resources. Good parents in Lincoln Park joined me on WVON, they joined me at Rainbow Push, and other places saying the CPS is forcing money down our throat. So race is the divisive issue. Race is a very profitable currency that politicians can use in promising people schools and other things. So if we didn't have this level of segregation, we would not have this level of a lopsided economy in the city. We would not have this level of disparity within the city. And why do we need to fight against this level of disparity? When the poorest child and the richest child can sit side by side, and each has the other's superintendents, the rich child can see the humility and the brilliance of a poor child, and the poor child can have the protection and the services of a rich child. That's why our challenge never was just to sit side by side. We need to fight for resources to get into the same school. When the city of Chicago has a really interesting budget, if you will, sort of shell game that they play. What does that mean? You've got CPS is a $6 billion budget. The city of Chicago is a $6 billion budget. Airports is a budget. Park districts is a budget. You got all these little budgets, so you never see the entire city budget. And this is how they can find money and shift it to use city funds to build a Wintrust Arena for a private university like DePaul, and Chicago public school students don't have their own arena, and they have a $6 billion budget. How can you have a $6 billion budget for our children and the bonds are paying 10% interest? These are junk bonds. That's too much money. You mean our children have junk credit? Children that are unborn that are going through the system are paying too much interest. So there's some ways that you can do that, but the city has to be transparent. Now they found a way to raise almost $2 billion to try to lure Amazon to Chicago. Mayor Daley found a way with some bubble gum and other stuff to try to find $16 billion to bring the Olympics to town, right? So every time they want to do something for the greater Chicago economy, they find the money. And when it comes to Negroes, blacks, brown, and women in education, oh, we're broke. Stop it. It's simply not true. We need to reallocate the resources in the city. And think about this on the charter, which really bothers me. Because I know people that are business people, and they've tried to get me to invest and be a part of charters. I said, I can't. It's unconscionable. And I tell you why. It's like the business that Bruce Rauner's in. When I get my tax bill, just like you, and I see the people that are making money off the charter school, first of all, it's a business, so you're in it to make money. And if you look at the rents that companies are paying in the charter schools, Bruce Rauner is still making money off of charter schools. So if you've got $8,000 allocated per pupil and you've got 200 students or whatever, they're going to put a 10 or 15% rent factor in to go into a building so that the landlord can make some money. We've already paid for the building that they just closed. That's money that's being diverted away from the child's education. That's unconscionable. And we're paying a price for it right now. I hope I answered your question. Now, we should also understand this. As we sit right over here on Carroll Street in the West Loop, and what's driving the economy over here? It's the knowledge economy. Google's setting up over here. Amazon's talking about distribution. Manufacturing isn't what it used to be. When you talk about raising minimum wage to $15 an hour, and you look at screens and other technology, you're going to have the point of display system to change for $10,000 as opposed to paying someone on an annual basis $30,000. This is the generation of ever continuing learning. Our grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren are going to continuously need to take a class in the current economy. That when your skills go into obsolescence, you become less productive. Our children have to learn to become now ever learners. The family has to learn. Your benefits are going to go online. Our children are going to need access to learning. And if you think that this isn't something we should be afraid of, I shouldn't tell you this, but I accidentally took a wrong piece of medicine the other day because I didn't have my glasses. Now, can you imagine if one of these young persons that dropped out of school can't read the medicine and they're going to give you the wrong medicine? You know, 10% of the people that are dying from medicine is because they've been given the wrong medicine. You know that, right? That people are administering the wrong medicine just simply couldn't read. So, hope you don't get sick.
So we're going to take one more question. We're going to ask Jonathan to make a closing statement, because then we'll have Kimberly with the next part of our, I'm sorry, here's the microphone.
Hold on.
One last question.
Is that Brandon Johnson?
Yes,
Stand up,
there's
Brandon.
Brandon.
Give Brandon a round of applause.
Hey, Brandon Johnson.
I was wondering how come G2 moved. Come on up here, Brandon and G2. I need to see you all.
You can say it.
That's my rabble-rousing crew.
So do we have a last question? And, is ours coming up? Oh, okay, Brandon. Come on, G2.
Brandon's running for office. He can't miss any opportunity to let him know. And I know Brandon as an activist. And I would say for anybody that wants to seek office, I think we have to teach our children civics. You should be known for doing something in the community before you decide to run for office. Come on up here, Brother G2. And I bring these men up here. Tam, I need you to sit up here with us. Is because they're men that I admire, I respect. And there are so few people that actually show up that will be a part of a sit-in at a school and go to a school where where their children aren't currently going. It's very few people that are selfless. I thank Tammy for having come out to Rainbow Push, and that's my prayer, that's my spirit behind all of this, is that everybody would take on a school, take on a neighborhood that's not yours. Just don't fight for your job, fight for the school, fight for the education. I think we need to get back to the bigger picture, and I've seen these persons on this stage. Is that Gervais? There goes another troublemaker. Come on up here, Gervais. These are people, I'm so honored to be here. These are people I've been involved in sit-ins with schools in the new millennium. I know the 60s were a great time, but there are some civil rights battles that are going on right now. There goes my neighbor, Pat. Come on up here a little closer, Pat. She's a stand-up, and Brother Bob Starks. And it's only a few that make a big difference. And so I know I've talked too much, but I'm honored to see my people.
So we were actually gonna, well, we weren't expecting these guys up here, but as Mr. Jackson just said, these are guys that I know have been in the struggle for forever, and I don't know if G2 or Brandon wants to make a statement before we move on.
No, your beard is grayer, so you get to go first.
Yes, sir.
I would like to say this on behalf of the next county commissioner of Cook County, Mr. Activist, educator, Mr. Brandon Johnson. Give him a round of applause. You're up, Brandon. When he's about to run for office, you got to give him an introduction. You just can't pass him the mic. The next county commissioner, Brandon Johnson.
Well, so then I got to stand up since I'm wearing my good girdle. Right. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for your work and your leadership and your example, and quite frankly, the legacy that you're living is a testament to what's possible. That the movement can and shall be sustained beyond our parents' generation. And quite frankly, I mean, we're in the middle of a moment right now where we have a tremendous opportunity to elevate and raise issues in this season that are critical to the future of, can I be quite frank with you, to the future of Black Chicago. The fact of the matter is, the Negro Removal Act that is in full effect, the only way we're going to be able to push back and stop the exodus of Black folks is by standing up and fighting for public sector and fighting for not just the services that we rely upon and deliver, but those who actually deliver the services. And working alongside Tammy, I met her several years ago when her school was being attacked, and she's been on the front line fighting this issue. And I will just close with this. There are moments in history where the moment defines the people, and then there are moments when the people define the moment. I believe we are in a moment where we as the people have to define the moment that we're in. When the moment defines us, we lose. When we define the moment, we do not play by their rules. We do not accept what they put forward, and we begin to challenge and push back against the very evils and ills that have attacked our people since our inception, quite frankly, in this experiment in which we call the so-called United States of America. And so one of the reasons why I think this issue is important is because you cannot sustain Black political power if you're not fighting for Black political W-2s. The best thing that my father ever did for me and my 9 brothers and sisters, that brother went to work every single day. He had a public sector job. He now has a pension. He likes cruises. And in 2036, when I retire with my pension, I'll be there along with him. And the grudge that is against working class families, we need to relieve those people of that grudge. We have to. And so I'm honored and glad that we're in this moment. And yes, of course, I am running for Cook County Commissioner of the 1st District to put forth an agenda for the interests of working class families. And I can promise you this, when I'm successful in March, this is not just simply about an election, not one. This is about 2019. This is about 2020. This is about beyond. And that if we can win this message on protecting the public services that we deliver every single day, protecting those that actually do the work, and the most important thing, We have to demand that millionaires and billionaires and large corporations pay their fair share in taxes. We should not feel guilty because we're demanding that the people at the very top who benefit from the misery and the pain that they cause to actually put some skin in the game to protect our services. And so the fight for black educators is the fight for black political power, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
First thing I would just say, you know, I'm honored to be here. When I heard that there was a forum around the attack on black teachers, folks that know, that I work with know that that's something I rant and rave about all the time. And I'm ready to get to work to do something about it. You know, I went to Wendell Smith on 103rd in Cottage Grove. There used to be a grocery store down the street from my house called Oak Foods. And my mom, on Saturdays, would bump into my 4th grade teacher, Miss Coleman. And Miss Coleman would tell on me in front of my mother. You know, I was the class clown. I was the one talking about people's mama and stuff like that. So don't get on my bad side, because I still got a couple of jokes. But the point is just that in, you know, that reality in the neighborhood I live in now, I live in Austin, I couldn't send my son to the neighborhood school that's about 4 minutes from my house. Because in a building with almost 700 children, there may be 3 black teachers in the entire building. And this is not just a Chicago dynamic. This is happening all over the country. It's happening in New Orleans. I know black teachers, black men who have to go into other small towns outside of New Orleans in order to teach. I know black teachers that have been displaced out of Washington, D.C. because the charter schools won't hire them, right? This happened in Philadelphia. It's happening in Oakland. And in all of these cities where we see this dynamic, we also see the reduction in the black population, without fail, without fail. And so I believe that the Negro Removal Act is a federal act, but I believe it has a local solution. And what I like to share is that, you know, there's a group of about 100 students that are fighting like wet cats to stop their school from closing in Inglewood. These children are eloquent, they're knowledgeable, they're disciplined, they're serious, and I believe we're gonna win. We're working with them, we're supporting them in this fight, and I believe that the mistake of an elitist, aggressive, corporate regime, an oppressive society is always to underestimate the oppressed. It's always to underestimate our capacity, our will, our strength, our love for each other. I believe that this moment where they're trying to close NTA, when they should be modeling NTA for other neighborhood schools around the city, this moment where they're shutting down historical high schools in Inglewood, all of them, and not giving the students the right to attend the schools, is the perfect opportunity for us to show Rahm Emanuel this is the worst mistake he ever made. And I'm not saying that to kind of charge people up, I mean that our only limitations are the ones we accept. And they do what we let them do. They do what we let them do. When you look in the eyes of those children that are standing up for the right for their education, a movement building experience will be if black people from all over the city of Chicago converged on this fight. It would be an inspiring experience. It would fill our neighborhoods with hope. And that it is important. It is important because what the man is doing, what the mayor is doing, if I could speak candidly, is he is throwing out he is rolling the dice. Let me see what black people gonna do. Let me see what the union gonna do. Now either we're gonna pass the test or we're gonna fail it. I'm ready to pass it.
Pass the test.
I'm ready to pass it. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're totally off the agenda, but I appreciate, yeah. I know, I don't disagree with you, and that's one of the reasons that we actually convened this group. So what do we do next? Because the next part of our agenda was next steps. What do we do? I agree with Brother G too. Pardon? Yes.
Okay, my concern is about the merger of CTU and Charters. Now, we know it's in the midst of 4 schools closing down, underutilized. Charters can easily utilize those schools and keep them open. Panel, was it a right decision for Charters to merge with CTU? Or should we have just gone on strike and gotten those 4 schools repopulated? I don't think it's making sense. I don't think it was in our best interest to merge with the charter when we're in the midst of closing 4 schools that don't even have a public neighborhood school anymore. You know, the community doesn't even have a public neighborhood school anymore.
All right, do you know
so-
what? That was slightly beyond
that
our
question's
scope.
to the whole panel.
Okay. Okay.
I think that's a great question. I'd like to separate the two. That one, the charter school movement, to the good of it, was supposed to take some children out of the public schools that were behind grade level, intensify their reading, writing, math, and then push them back into the school. That was the original concept. Then it changed to public school system needs competition. So the charter school is off course, off track. So I am not for expanding charters. I think there are 1 or 2 that are doing a great job, and there are a bunch of them that have absolutely failed, that have no oversight, that need to be closed and brought back in, and that shouldn't have happened. That's one. I think the second part is, that's more important to what G2 was saying, and Brandon, I want to take some action. And if I could find out the date, the time, and the place, I want to join these young students, let them see that grown folks, men and women, are concerned about their cause, which is our cause. And I've just been inspired to get some signs made up hearing G2 on SOS, Save Our School. I want to get them, and we need to start putting them in our yards and our windows. And SOS, Save Our Schools and Save Our Souls. When these schools go, the children are going to be inflamed. And think about the school in Winnetka. It's amazing when you go up there. There are like 4 or 5 schools in that same building. They've got students that need alternative. They got students that are delinquent. They've got remedial education. They got grade level. They've got AP classes. The schools should be able to accommodate all the different levels and needs of the children. We can't let them pick our school apart and our children. Some students are like flowers. They're late bloomers. So I don't like the idea of testing children and closing schools on them. How are you going to hold a school responsible? A school is a function of the neighborhood. A school isn't bricks and mortar. A school is a neighborhood. If the children aren't achieving, it's something going on in the neighborhood that we should all be concerned about, not the bricks and the mortar. That's an excuse. But you show me a place where there's high unemployment, high poverty, high levels of illiteracy, that's a neighborhood that doesn't need to be called failing. That's a neighborhood that needs to have the city and the resources wrap their arms around them so we can pick it up.
And Jonathan, I'll just add one other thing to that. I mean, Pat, to your question, is in terms of like next steps that we can take. There's a program that's called Grow Your Own.
Yes, sir.
And the whole purpose of Grow Your Own is to attract Black students into the teaching profession. And right now, you know, as we begin to, as G2 said, as we collectively fight for Inglewood, where, you know, me as a resident in Austin and those around the city fight to protect the schools in Inglewood, we also need to put a demand on our state legislature to, one, we need to defund Teach for America because that's the operation in which charter schools are coming out of, those educators, and then actually fund Grow Your Own because those are our teachers, right? So I think we can do a couple of things, Pat. We can make sure that we're attracting Black folks into the profession while at the same time fighting for the interests of Inglewood. I mean, we're gonna have to walk, chew gum, and do everything else in between, and I'm up for it. I'm down for it.
And I would add this, that, and it, you know, one of the things, we're having a meeting in Detroit, a national town hall on February 13th. And one of the focuses is what will we do to bring more Black teachers in the classroom. We're calling it Stopping the Attack on Black Teachers. And one of the things we're recommending is to nationalize Grow Your Own teachers. And so that we can create a pipeline of students and also paraprofessionals that have the gift of children that want to teach. And we create that pipeline and then also create initiatives to keep black teachers in the classroom, right? But then there also has to be something that we have to tie a tourniquet on the wound. Because right now there's a gaping wound and our children are going to schools and they are learning that black people are not fit to lead because they are looking at white teachers. And I had white teachers growing up, but I had diversity. So I would just suggest that, and I'm talking to the Advancement Project and the National NAACP, the idea of local lawsuits along with local direct action by educators and community to begin to say, why can't we teach our children, right? And so I think it's a three-pronged piece. I think it's a programmatic piece, grow your own teachers. I think it's legal, looking at, denying a child the right to have a culturally diverse teaching force, right? That they don't have that same reality in Winnetka. Children in Winnetka are not being taught by black teachers. Children in the North Shore are being taught by black teachers. So why are black children only being taught by white teachers, right? And so I'm pushing to see, is there an angle there? I'm not a lawyer, I don't know. It feels right, but often what feels right, so we're examining that. But also I believe there has to be a demand. And I would just float into the hemisphere if we get cadres of black educators and parents to begin to occupy the main offices of elementary schools in their own community where we're not being allowed to teach. As we have a legal strategy moving, as we're moving the programmatic piece with Grow Your Own Teachers. We're trying to figure this out because I think just complaining about it, which I've been doing, I've been guilty of it, is not gonna get us any further. I think it's time for some action, right?
All right, thank you guys so much. We're gonna move on in the program, and thank you, G2, so much. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Brandon. And Kimberly is gonna come up, and what we're gonna talk about are next steps. What do we do next? Thank you guys for giving us a good area to start in, and we'll see what we can do with that.
See, now I asked them why are they leaving, well, now I'm coming up here. Thank you. Please give our guests a round of applause again. We're almost finished, but we still need you, so if you can stay a few more minutes, it would be a great credit and a help to us. Remember, we're gonna bring this focus to, we're unionists. We believe in the power of labor, organized and unorganized, but we believe that labor power comes most intensely when we're involved. That leaders up on high are great, but it's the masses that move things. And I think that that's what the people who were up here also said to some degree. We look to them for leadership, they're famous faces, and they do a lot for our communities and our groups, but we're the ones living the lives too, and we do a lot where we are as well. So as Chicago Teachers Union members, and as prospective and current members of the AFT Black Caucus Chicago, we need to think about what we're going to do, what we're going to do next. So let's just do a quick retrospective of where we were. Where we were is where we are. They were coming for us, and they were quietly dismantling things in the 90s. They were quietly dismantling things for the students in the 80s. Remember how from the 1970s to the 1980s, how the achievement gap, if you believe that there is one, was being closed until President Reagan came in and started dismantling all of the programs that our ancestors had fought for, that had helped to close that gap. It was our people, and in unity with friends, that made sure that we were able to get the money and the resources. And they were slowly, these resources, whittled away and taken away from us. And then in the 1990s, they made the people that benefited complicit in taking even more and more from us. And we could even blame maybe our own union history for being complicit and thinking that they knew everything. That's what happens when you don't have a member-driven union, or you have people that think that people in the officers are the only people who can impact a situation. But that's not the leadership now. Remember the lies that they told about our students being stupid and violent? Remember how they lied on us, the myths about the bad teachers? The bad teachers, you know what that's a euphemism for, right? That was the black teachers. And so they used that as the excuse to get rid of all of them. When I say the teachers, I'm including paraprofessionals, because in some of our cases, in some of our neighborhoods, our kids don't really distinguish between the paraprofessional educators and teachers. They don't. It's just Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so. So we were doing the work. And those people who make the decisions to dismantle education and to deform it, they go for us, and they go for us first. They dismantled us. They dismantle us with company unionism. They dismantle us with charter schools. They took us apart with a lie, which was very successful among the public, that unions are corrupt, okay? And they picked us off by talking about, remember all the lies that underutilized, under-enrolled, just the plain, we need a reach in the peer evaluations. We needed all these things to so-called make us better, but really it was to make them richer. So part of what we need to do as unionists, as a next step, is to get this message out. Advertisements can't do it. Advertising on TV can't do it. Being on radio is nice, but radio's also, the audiences for certain shows, they're limited. But what's not limited is if each of us goes back to where we are in our various places and really starts pushing the conversation and inviting people out. We only get bigger in solidarity. So the other thing I wanted to do was to bring back, before you tell me what next steps are, because you know what? If you see me as just somebody who's on a podium and a leader, we're never gonna walk. I mean, I'll be walking by myself or a couple of people. That's not good enough. But since we're all together as members, I will say this. A former teacher and a former CTU member named Mrs. Collins said we should get a big button and wear it out in public and put Chicago Teachers Union. We were right. I want to tell you about all this stuff that we were right about. Since probably the last 7, 8 years, our union has had a type of leadership that believed in class struggle and class consciousness, believed that our class was being pushed down and dismantled and taken apart, and that black people would bear the brunt of that, and it's proven, that analysis is proven right. The analysis of charter schools and what they were really there for was not improvement, but deception. And I don't mean to say anything against charter school workers, because they are we. But the truth of the matter is that the corporations that push this are making tons of money. Where are they getting this money? By the money that they're not paying for our students and for our workers. That's where they're getting the money. Privatization, we were right about that. When you privatize services, what do? You take the workers out of the public sector unions and you break apart the union strength and the idea that people could come together in solidarity to change their working conditions. You privatize them, and if you give them a union, the chance to have a union at all, it'll be weakened enough where they won't get the protections. We see that with the Aramark contract, don't we? And now we see it with the maintenance contract, don't we? We see that with the different contracts that take over learning for the school, don't we? We see them using that to control some of the programs and some of the pedagogy with which we deliver instruction, don't we? Some private contractor, some program is supposed to be proven, and we're supposed to do it. Well, as a union, we bargain so that we have some sort of control over that. But when in the union we feel weakened and we don't participate and we feel demoralized and we feel alone, that's the opposite of what unionism is. So part of the next step is to build up union power by building up our feeling about how we are as labor unionists. The next thing, we were right about the misleaderships of the schools, from Mr. Huberman to Broussard, to Arne Duncan, to Barbara Bird Bennett, to the Yahoo that just left, Forrest Claypool, and I might be missing somebody else. I think that I'm missing a person. We were right about every single one of them, about what they were going to do. And I think that people believe us somewhat, but they're desperate because they're like, you know what, you're right, but my kid is gonna get out of school in 5 years or 3 years and whatever, and I gotta do this thing. We somehow have to show people that black people are under attack, and when black people are under attack, everybody, it's a matter of time. The racism that all of the people on the panel that talked about, it's being used as a tool to tear labor apart, has done a very good job. But guess what? For those people who are white workers in the school, it hasn't increased their money. It hasn't even made their conditions better, it's made them worse. So that which happens to us trickles to other people. That's what racism does. It makes you think it's not gonna happen, but it does. So somehow we do have to make solidarity among all of us, but we have to start as black people taking the agenda and making it clear to people. And we got to do it in the old-fashioned way that black people did with the radicalism that we had. We forget it and we turn it into something that it wasn't. Some people deny that we were militant and radical. We don't all have to be communists and socialists, but what I'm saying is it took a lot of shoe leather. It took a lot of beatings, and it took a lot of other things. It didn't take the offices. It didn't take nice suits. And so we have to kind of take that on. We have to like roll up our sleeves and start having that kind of analysis. What else were we right about? The testing. Testing, but we were right about that before with the Iowa test. Testing has always been used against black people, written by researchers that were playing with our minds and used to show who's great and who's not. But this is insidious, where Pearson, which is a multinational company, controls national boards now, where it didn't before. It does almost all of the educational books for the colleges and almost all of the educational books for schools now. When you have that, when you have a lock, and also EdTPA, I think Pearson does that. So if you want to get into education, which is harder and harder for black people to do, if you want to get into education, you have to go kind of have a relationship with the testing monopoly of Pearson. And then you've got places like our state that's trying to decide, and I believe two people could talk to you about that. Juanita Douglas is one of them, she's back there, that are actually figuring out how to kind of coalesce testing and kind of centralize it, so there's even more constriction of who can become a teacher and who can't. The PIRA law is a great example of how the testing agenda affects those of us who are in school. When we're in school, maybe it's not Pearson, but it's actually a REACH program. That's testing kind of. It's like you have to follow these certain guidelines and rubrics and tests in order to keep your job. And some of them aren't the greatest things to do. This idea of data. Data's been used against black people. We are the data, we are the farm. We're not just the farm hands, we're the farm, we're the crop. And other people have said this, but I got you here now. We were right about that. Start taking some of the things we were right about and saying, we were right, our union was right, our union was right. And then the police presence in schools and discipline issues and restorative justice. CTU's on the front line in this area about that. But that which happens outside our homes, it happens inside the school, and if we let it, we tend to let issues like that be imparticulate and separate and say that they're connected, but we've got to make a harder case for it. We were right about it. We were right about the elected school board. We were also right that we couldn't do it alone. That's why we had Journey for Justice, COCO, we had Raise Your Hand, Illinois Raise Your Hand. More than a score. We have other organizations that we work with and other labor organizations that we work with, other community organizations, Arise Chicago. We're right about solidarity because a union can't do it all alone. Unions in the past didn't do it all alone, and we can't do it alone. We were right about all those things. We're also right about what's happening now. Mr. Jackson said that we should do an audit of, the dirty conditions in Mollison. The union spearheaded that fight. The union spearheaded the fight about special ed, and then the papers and the news media broke it wide open. But we were doing that beforehand. You got to start taking your power, and you got to start looking at what we're doing. We're doing it. Grow your own. We've been talking about that. We actually saved, I feel, the Grow Your Own program. It's in the cut. Here it is. On page 5, above the Black Caucus statement, is more information about Grow Your Own. But until we get empowered by reading and by meeting with each other, it is not going to happen. So I'd like some people to stand up. What can you commit to? What are next steps? Because we know really what we must do. The powers are big and they're against us. There's some changes that we have to make up here. Because we've been involved in the rest of the body, but realize that the powers are against it, and they're whittling us down on purpose. And the other thing I want to tell the public before I give this up is that remember what's coming down the pike. They have tried to destroy unions for so long. They made every kind of rule against unions. They tried to turn the public against unions. Public union density is the lowest that it has been since people started fighting the Pinkertons on the street just to be able to get whatever. Look what's coming down the pike. The Supreme Court of the United States is about to try to rule on a decision of Janus versus AFSCME. Janus was an Illinois worker who's like, I don't like unions. They're not going to do anything for me. If I have a problem, I'll hire my own lawyer or whatever. He totally doesn't believe in collective power. He resents being in the union, and he was a perfect test case to bring up and say, my rights are being violated because I have to join a union and pay dues for a union that I don't want to belong to. And other workers shouldn't have to pay either. That's like another chip in the coffin, because black union density, we're there. We as black people know that we need unions. We fought to get in them. We fought for the jobs. We know we need unions. And now if the Supreme Court, which is very conservative, rules against us, that is a way of trying to chip away and put the final nail in the coffin. And if you get black people out of unions, or if you get people to be able to say, I can get the same services through the union that if I just don't sign up, because the law says that they have to provide the service anyway, you're gonna have to start chipping away at the final wall. We're a bulwark, and they're gonna chip away at us, and they're gonna destroy us. And then can you imagine us having the benefits that we do? Being able to do what we could do with the kids? Because unions fight for what we can do with the children. Unions help us. Haven't we put ourselves on the line to say, we're not gonna have the special ed kid taught in the closet. They're coming out in the classroom. That was us. Okay, they're gonna start chipping away to the point where the unions will go bankrupt, and then we'll start to dissolve as people are just trying to scrap and scrape and do it alone. And if you have that, then you have a situation where no labor is going to have it well. Start thinking about this. We have to fight for our union. So what I want to say to you is, before you stand up, 2 things. Join the AFT, Black Caucus. We've got somebody over there who is selling goods and also has the 2-year membership, and then come to some of the meetings. And through our own activism and other things, like you see Tammy Vincent everywhere, and we know lots of people that are in the audience. We could tell you different actions that are happening, but we need to also strategize about how we change a mindset, our own mindset, put more of a class consciousness in there, because our class is being killed. A class of black people, a class of poor working class people, and a class of people who think they're middle class and are a paycheck away from disaster. And the social safety net that our people fought for, is no longer there. Can we have some people standing up here or telling us what you're willing to commit to, or what next steps are, and we will write those next steps down? Hold on 1 second. Can you come over? Come over. Okay, this is Stephanie Collins. And then
Okay.
Pat Breckinridge. Can we have some other people? And then if you can, not look at me, because look that way. I'm just, look that way.
That's okay. Hello, everyone. I am Stephanie Collins. I am a retired CTU teacher, 32-year veteran, one of the, what do I want to call it? A product of poor reach evaluations. After teaching for 30 years, I became suddenly stupid.
Right.
And kind of like one of the people that was kind of forced out. But what I would like to commit to, and what I would see would be a good thing for me, because I'm still a teacher at heart, is the Grow Your Own program. As a retired educator with 32 years of experience, I think that many of us that are retired have something to offer, because I know what I learned from Black educators growing up. You know, I didn't have that problem of failing the basic skills test that they're giving now, and that's because of the educators that I had growing up in grammar school and high school, even talking about college. So I think that there's something that we as Black retired educators, not all of us just want to go out and have lunch. Many of us are active and we want to see something done. So I want to commit to that, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it, but figure it out, trust me.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Patricia Breckinridge. I'm a 22-year veteran teacher. I am also a reading clinician at my church, where as I service kids that are on frustration level, instructional level, and independent level. So what's happening in the school system right now is that we are testing students on frustration level. They are simply not ready. And we're blaming African-American teachers and pushing them out of the school system, and they have no control over a child being on reading level for the most part, because reading level is something that has to be learned. A child has to pace his or herself, for instance, through a 200-page pleasure book before they even start academics. 200 pages, a child can finish 10 pages a day within 20 days. 20 times 10 is 200. That's easy to calculate. But is it done in a household? No, it isn't. So we need the parents. We need legislation, we need teachers, we need administration, we need everybody in on a program that will allow a child ownership over their reading level and will allow them to be tested on their, of course, instructional level instead of frustration level. When you test a child on frustration level, of course, they're not going to perform. They're not ready. Ready is the most commonly used research word in the education arena. I mean, U.S. Department of Education is testing kids. School reform is testing kids on instructional level, not on frustration level. That's the whole nutshell in school reform. And it hasn't been done yet. It's a problem nationwide. Thank you.
My name is Doris Lewis, and I'm a retired teacher and counselor. And I'm ready to do something very radical. I'm ready to take to the streets. When we took to the streets, people paid attention. We're the only ones who are not taking to the streets on a consistent, collective basis. I'm ready to join the Black Caucus. I want to help you organize. I want to get all of these teachers who have been let go. Let's organize and get them together. Let's take it to Rahm Emanuel's door. That's the only thing they understand. We just can't keep talking about it and complaining about it. I am so upset about what they're doing to our communities and what they're doing to our children. They do not care. So we have got to force them to care. That's what I'm ready to do. I'm ready to take to the streets. I don't want to sit in any meetings. I am ready to fight back. It's time for Black people to start fighting back. We showed everybody else how to protest and demonstrate. Now we're sitting at home complaining and talking on the phone or calling into the talk shows. Let's get busy. You know what? I will work my finger to the bones because I am sick of this white supremacy. I am 73 years old. This is what I grew up under in Mississippi. I was a part of Medgar Evers NAACP Youth Council, so I am used to going to the streets. And when we went to the streets, that's how we got the rights that we have today, and we're losing all of them because we're not doing anything. You know, power is being collective and working together. That's power. And we have the power, but I'm just tired of my people thinking that we don't have the power anymore. We do. Let's take to these damn streets and shut that white boy down there on the 5th floor down. I am sick of him. I am tired of him. I'm tired of all of our elected officials who are complicit, who are going along with the program. We vote them in and they do not represent our interests. We've got to go after them as well. We got to put people in who are going to speak up for our interests. And if we don't come to the conclusion that that's what we're going to have to do collectively, they are going to continue to do what they're doing. I remember a few years ago of someone asking Harry Belafonte, Harry, why do you keep doing what you're doing? And he said to them, and it stuck with me, I just cannot let them think that they have won.
Thank you.
Would
would one of the Black Caucus members kindly give her a form and get her information?
My name is Denise Hetherington, and I'm a speech pathologist. I retired from CPS 2 years ago, but I still work because I love what I do. And I am definitely going to join and put in wherever I can and wherever I need. I want to support the efforts here because after 35 years, I saw what was going on in the schools with our children and in our neighborhood. So I'm definitely going to give you my support.
Thank you so much. Pardon me, I'm sorry. And if you would kindly also tell current Black teachers as well and friends, we welcome people of all colors to our meetings, but let's increase our presence.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
My name is Bob, Professor Emeritus at Northeastern Illinois University. And let me just come very close and talk to you as a member of the union. If you are going to have a grow your own program, you have to begin at the university level. Do you realize that public universities throughout the country and in the state of Illinois are getting rid of education programs at the university level? So one of the things you've got to demand from the governors that are running for governor in the state of Illinois, is to make sure that they demand that those public universities maintain the education majors and departments within the universities. Otherwise, the Grow Your Own program is defunct. Thank you very much.
Dr. Stark?
Dr. Stark, I have a question though. So
Yeah.
what are they, okay, they're doing it under the guise of what? And 'cause I haven't
One of the guys is money. They said, we don't have the money. Right, they said they can't afford to have separate departments. Secondly, they're complaining that people don't want to go into teaching anymore. Okay? And if you're going to grow your own, you have to go out and recruit students and put them in those programs.
Dr. Starks makes a really good point, stay there for a second, and that is that the union hasn't typically gone to universities or college campuses, and part of the reason is that when it has been attempted, the universities and college campuses don't give permission for that for obvious reasons. So we have to fight to get our students into the university, but we also have to fight for those people to know what a union is and what a union does. Mm-hmm. Because TFA, Teachers for America, they're in the university and they're anti-union. Mm-hmm. And they're anti-union for a purpose. So we've got to fight this. Do your third point.
Right. The third point is the state of Illinois has one of the most arcane testing systems for teachers in the country. So you've got to demand that the governor that you support is going to attack these issues head on, or otherwise you won't give them your support. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, sir.
My name is LaShawn Wallace. I'm a paraprofessional. I'm a teacher assistant at Taft High School. I've been in the system for 30 years. And I've been a teacher assistant because I love my position. And I also, what was your question, Kim? What did we want to?
Yes, what can you commit to?
Okay. So I was listening to some of the speakers. I think what we could commit to, I am an organizer, and I'm one to knock doors. I call, I talk to parents. I have conversations in the family. What I see is that the families don't have conversations anymore, because there was a time when everyone talked to each other, and there was a family network. That has broken down. So we have to figure out how can we get that family network back first, because that's how we get, Kim, I wanted to look at you while I'm talking. So I'm committing to trying to get that family network back, to get people to feel like it matters, okay? Because I think what happened is we've been attacked so, and the old matriarchs are not there to kind of keep us builded up and keep us balanced to the point where they just giving up, because it's too much on some levels. It is too much. I commit to keeping conversations going, keeping parents aware of the real issues. Don't let them just go away with false news. Making them aware of their rights and their children's rights, because a lot of that we are dealing with young parents. Our parents now are like 16 and up that are bringing their children to school, and they have these deficiencies in these learning abilities, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to go back because the older people are gone, or either they're out on their own and they refuse to go back. So we have to figure out how to bridge that gap, to give those supports so that they can get to the point where this young lady is saying, come out and protest and come out and be a part of an action. Because if you don't feel your worth, you don't feel like being a part of a group if you don't know. So, and the next thing is vote. We have to let people, this is a time where people have to get political savvy. They have to know the issues, and they have to know those people that are running, what are their issues, what are they standing for? Do I put my name on their name? A lot of people, when I talk to people, I'm calling. I'm one of the phone bankers for Brandon, and I call. They don't even know who the candidates are. So how do we change that? That's one thing. We need to change that within our communities, within our schools, within our families, talking to our kids more about it, because kids go home and talk to their parents, and then parents talk. Like I say, the internet between the families have stopped, because in my house when I grew up, everything was talked about, from political to baseball to whatever, okay? So that has broken down. That's what I see, and I'm willing to help with that. I'm always looking for ways. No matter where I'm at, I'm always striking up conversation. Did you know? Do you know? Like you said, what the union has done. I'm always having that conversation. The board is always picking back on what we've done. Since this administration been in, as far as data, as far as research, they are picking up on the things we've done, and some of us don't even know that they are doing this. So that's my thing.
Thank you.
All right.
Tammy Vincent will close for us.
All righty. Thank everyone for coming. I know we ran a little longer. It was all Kim's fault. But I thought it was a very, very good first meeting, in my opinion. The reason we convened was, again, as the title says, we know that the education reform that's been taking place for many years is it's strategic, it's intentional, and it's trying to dismantle public education. I guess for the economics of it all, let's funnel all that public money for education, for a pension or whatever, let's funnel it away from a public good. We know that the narrative that the black educator is the problem is a misnomer, and our goal is to show that we're paying attention, we're listening, and we're prepared to fight for our profession. So even though we do meet a lot, we have general meetings every third Tuesday. again, that everyone's welcome to, we also have a movie night. And our movies are so we can provoke conversation, so we can actually consider strategically what can we do next. By looking at things that have happened to us or around us or whatever we were complicit in, it helps us plan for the future. And a future event that's coming up is that we're going to have another forum. This one is essentially targeted on the economics of education reform. Thinking about the next one, and I think I'm losing my mic, what we're thinking about is to talk about how not only is the narrative of essentially defaming black educators, the harm that it's causing to not only black students, but all students. Because the research has shown that not only can black educators teach black kids, we can teach white kids, we can teach Hispanic kids, Asian kids. Education should not have the racial barriers that's been attached to it. So our thought is, do we need to go back to a consent decree? Is that something that we work on as a group? But anyway, our hope is to information to the issues that we, within our small circle, have noticed, to widen our circle and to get some actions planned. So we'll see you guys, hopefully again in April. Hopefully in April 11th. So we'll share some more information with you. So thank you everyone for coming out. Thanks.